When my ex and I first met, it was through a mutual friend that we had. Everything was great at the beginning. We did everything together, went out of town together, attended some events in town, went and did everything. It was really happy. Everything was just really great in the beginning. Prior to us getting married, there was not lots, but there were some arguments. Nothing was physical. Just a lot of... At the beginning, it was like the honeymoon phase. Everything was good. We never really fought until after we got married, and that's when things got heated and physical. There would be some arguments where he would start pushing me. He would kick me, punched me in the stomach. There was a lot of times where he would pull my hair and then shove me into the wall. And as far as the physicalness, it started out slowly, and then it was always followed with, "I'm sorry, it was an accident," and then it just kept getting worse and more frequently. There were a few times where he broke my phone on 2 different occasions. I had to go buy new phones, and then he would get those and throw them against the wall or throw them on the ground, and they would shatter. And he did the same thing to his phone one time, and there was just no way to call for help when he would do that. That was something that was always on my mind, because I knew, being in law enforcement, it's a very close-knit brotherhood. And so I always had that in the back of my mind every time I reached out for help and there were a few times where it was covered up, and because the officers that arrived at the house either worked with his dad, who was also retired. He did 31 years. So there was lots of close-knit with the family and law enforcement. That was a constant battle. There would be times where they would show up and tell us, "Well, y'all just need to get along." And I'm in tears, and I have marks on my face or on my neck, and they would see it, but it was never acknowledged. So the very last time that he had an episode and attacked me was the time that they did an emergency detention on him, and he was taken to the hospital, and that very next day is when I went and filed for a protective order and filed for divorce. There were a lot of things that led up to the last time, but it was just that I had to do it if I wanted to keep surviving. He had pulled a gun on me 2 different times, so I knew at that point it had to be done. I needed to get out and keep myself safe and keep my kids safe. I had some friends that lived in town that knew what was going on, so I could always lean on them. I had a safe house that I could go to when things got heated. So I had some support here, and then my parents were close enough that they could just get in the car and come up here and be here for me. It was a sign of relief. It was just a big burden lifted off my shoulders. Like, I knew that I'd finally gotten away and could have my big break from all of the abuse, the physical, verbal, mental, emotional. It was just a big sigh of relief, and I knew that I was okay. I mean, it happened all the time. I don't think that there was ever a month that went by that something didn't happen. And we were married less than a year. That was always my concern. I did not ever feel comfortable leaving the kids with him. I mean, he was an alcoholic, and he was also addicted to Adderall, and so I never knew what frame of mind he was in, and he had frequent outbursts and was always angry about something, so I never would leave them alone with him for any length of time anyway, but never hours at a time. He at that time was not working in law enforcement. He was working as a security guard. So when he and I first started dating, he was already in law enforcement. He had been in law enforcement for 12 years. He was fired from one job, went to a different agency out of town, worked there for about 6 months and was fired. Went to another local agency and worked there for a few months, and then he was fired again, but this time he shot a stray dog in his front yard, and there was an elementary school right behind the house, so that school went on lockdown, and he was fired immediately. And a few months had passed, and then he started working as a security guard, and where about a year later he was fired for sexual harassment with one of the nurses. I felt defeated every time, like they weren't taking me serious. There would be incidences where there would be multiple calls a day and nobody would step in and intervene, and it was hard, and I felt hopeless. I felt lost. I just lost who I was over time. The very last day that the protective order was still valid was the day that he ended up being at the same place that I was, and our kids were on a baseball team together, and it was the end of season party, and he was already there, and he wouldn't leave, and he tried to walk up to me and start yelling at me, and he even flipped me off in front of the kids and the parents. So I immediately called for help, and by the time that the officers arrived, he was gone, so they couldn't do anything or arrest him for violating the protective order. But he waited till the last day to come around and be in contact with me. A couple months ago, I got some anonymous text from a texting app. I don't know for a fact that it was him, but I'm pretty sure by the way that things were worded that it was him trying to harass me again. No, it was always emotional, verbal, physical. Anytime that we were in public and another female walked by, it was very degrading to see how he would stare at them, and he was always inappropriate. He loved to charm people. He always knew the right words to say, the right things to do, and so there were a couple times where I left and ended the relationship before we got married, and then he just always had the right words to say, and I just knew it was time to leave. I did go see a counselor for a little while. That was the best thing that I could do for myself and for my kids, to have someone to have a shoulder to lean on and to talk about the things that nobody else could really understand unless you've been in that situation before. And we as victims and survivors can relate to each other a lot better because we've already been through that. So it was very helpful to have someone else to talk to. For a while, it was very hard because I'd lost who I was, and just along the ways just felt like I didn't matter anymore, and I just lost my place with everything, it seemed like. So in the beginning, it was hard to really connect with anybody, family, friends, especially strangers. But with time, it gets better, and you heal, and you put yourself back together differently. It really boils down to the people, and the crime rate's also high in Lubbock. I just don't know that there's enough resources out there for people to get help to overcome the abuse, or the abuser to overcome. So maybe lack of resources could be something that contributes to that. Maybe there's not enough family or support for someone that is the abuser, so they don't have anyone to rely on. It could also be a lack of training for our first responders. And I mean, the call volume they get a day is a high number, and so maybe they're just not making some domestic violence a priority, or they're used to going on all the calls, and that's a lot of what they're used to taking calls for. And I don't know that the training is really up to par, maybe, but education, there's a lack of education, I think, in town. I remember a few of those phone calls made into police for help, and they are officers arriving at the house, and I just feel like some of those officers didn't take it very seriously. Some of the officers that showed up watched my ex grow up from a child to an adult, so they were already acquainted with each other, so I always felt like I was at a disadvantage. So I really think that making the public aware of resources could be better, not for just the abuser, but also the victim, so we all know where we can turn to, because we always hear call 911, but then and they try to connect you with more resources. But I feel like maybe if we had an outreach team that maybe went on the calls with officers to be there for the victims and to counsel them, that might be helpful, because when you're there dealing with an officer and you've just been beat up or choked or whatever the situation is, you're already distressed, and sometimes it helps to have a female be there with you. I never saw a female that was on any of the calls. They were always men. So that was difficult for me. I didn't really feel like I had full attention as the victim. But I think that an outreach team would be great to have for women and even men. So after all of this was said and done and I worked my way through it, I realized I don't have to be just another statistic. Like, there are things that I can do to help women, and I very much want to be part of the community that is there to be supportive. And so I started researching the numbers, and every year it has increased, not by hundreds, but a lot. So that was alarming. And I also think that mental health is also a factor. And so education all the way around on every area. Mental health is such a huge thing. And I think that's part of the problems that we're facing is lack of resources. And so it's a revolving door. So just from being here and seeing things and being in the legal side of things now, it has definitely been an eye-opener. The first thing that we've really sat down and had a heart-to-heart conversation about was respect, and the word no. And they know now what respect is and what respect is not. And so we talked about hitting someone is not okay. We've gone to counseling as a family and we've worked through it, but a lot of it is what goes on at home, and it starts when they're young. And so I've really just had to sit and think about every type of scenario that I've been through and how can I educate my kids to instill in their minds that that is not okay. So we've worked a lot on respect. They both witnessed some of the things, but my youngest probably saw more. it's very traumatizing to witness anything like that. He's very cautious about being around men he doesn't know. And so he's just very careful around strangers now. It was hard trying to find the right words to say and to be on a level where he can understand what I'm trying to tell him. And so, we struggled for a little while to really tailor a conversation to him that was understandable. But it was hard. It really was at first. But now with time, we've been able to really have some more deeper conversations about when this happened, how did that make you feel? So really just not reliving those moments, but just using them as examples of, don't do this when you get older. This is what happens, and not all of us are fortunate enough to live through it. It's always like the honeymoon at the very beginning. Everything's great. Everything's wonderful. There's no problems that you foresee. But now I'm extra careful. I'm very cautious about what information I talk about. I always let them know, hey, I've been in an abusive relationship, and I'm not going through that again. But really, the red flags that I look for is temperament. I will ask a question, and a couple days later, I might rephrase it a different way and see if I get the same answer. So that's one of my red flags. Is it could be something very simple, or it could be something kind of a deep question, and the response is something that I pay close attention to. And family is another thing that if they're not close to their family, there's a big distance between them. I want to know why, and what was their history like? What was it like if they were married, or just, have you ever had any problems with law enforcement? There's a lot that I would love to tell them. But the most important thing is to know that your life is invaluable and your voice matters. There is a way to get out, and you're not alone, and you never have to go through this alone. And people do want to help you get out and help you succeed, and there is a much better place on the other side of the world that you're going through right now. And you just really have to connect and want to get out of that relationship and stay out of it and better yourself. So my kids, they have different dads. My oldest son's dad lives pretty close to us. My youngest son, his dad has not been in the picture for 5 years, so it didn't really affect that relationship. When all this was going on, he was very supportive, and he was always there. He's always checking to make sure, are you okay? And so he was someone that I could count on to be there for me. And since that time, I think our relationship as a parent for our son has gotten stronger. We definitely want what's best for him, and for both of the kids. But not all people get along with their exes. But I can say that genuinely, we do get along, and we do want what's best for our kids. So, I say our kids, the kids. Interesting though, he would take my youngest, and they would go do stuff together with our child. So, for my son not having a father figure, he's always been pretty good with him. And so it just has really kind of strengthened things. Our support grew. Our support for each other has really gotten better. I know that if I ever needed anything, that he would be there. It was scary, having to start over and not knowing how am I going to make ends meet, where we went from 2 incomes, now it's going to be 1. So the fear of the unknown was a little intimidating, but I would do it all over again and not be in that relationship. So to me, it was worth taking that leap of faith and just going with the flow and take it day by day and really buckle down on a budget and stick to it. So at first, they had no idea. When we first got together, I was always talking to my parents, always in communication with them, my friends. So after we got married, I started having less communication, phone calls with them, and stopped going to see them as much, partly because I had bruises or marks on my arms and my neck, or my finger was broke, and I didn't want them to see any of that. So I hid all of that. And one day I just called my mom and started crying. I said, I can't do this anymore. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, this is what's been going on. And so to be at one point completely isolated from them, what I think was what really triggered them to know there's something going on. And it's just a vicious cycle. It really is. You start out with having all this freedom, and I know at some point, I don't know when, but he put a GPS tracking thing on my phone. So anytime that I left work or I would go somewhere, the grocery store, he would ask, where was I? When am I coming home? And you're supposed to be home 5 minutes ago. So, it really takes a toll on your life, and you've got to gain your control back and find your voice and stick up for yourself. When I first told them, I was scared. I didn't know how he was going to react or what they would think about him. As a matter of fact, at one of these nights when law enforcement got called, our house ended up being flagged as domestic violence. So there was never one officer. There was always at least 2 that would show up. One night they came over, and this was after he had started beating me up. My mom was there, so she saw some of what was going on as she was trying to call for help, and that's when he took one of my phones and broke it and tried to take hers. And I just remember thinking, this is it. He's going to either kill us or he's going to hurt us really bad, because he was in such a rage. And he went to the closet and got his gun out. And that's when he put it up to my head and told my mom, you better hang up the phone. And by that time, the call was already made. So he realized that the police were on their way, and he told us he was going to kill himself, and he was going to commit suicide by cop. And so when the officers got to the front door, that was one of the ones that he knew as a child. And he went and put the gun on the counter and went back to the front door, and they talked him out of it, and they took all the guns out of the house. And I just remember thinking in that very moment, this is my breakthrough. I'm finally going to get out of this. And they didn't do anything. There were reports made. In the reports, it says that the officers took the guns out of the house, and I don't know to this day why they let him stay in the house and didn't make him leave. But I just kept thinking, I'm finally going to get out of here. I'm going to make it through. And it didn't happen. And those days following that were the most intense days. I felt like I was walking on eggshells and had to watch behind my back everywhere I was going because I didn't know what he was going to do. Finally, whenever I got out of it, I just felt so much relief that I didn't have to deal with it anymore. Sorry. And then you meet people like Michelle, who have been through the same thing that I've been through, if not worse. And I can't say this enough, but you've got to connect with people and find your support and not be out alone. And you can't heal on your own. You've really got to find support to get through it. I have good days, I have bad days, more good than bad. I still am dealing with a lot of the pain in my neck and my back. I've gone to doctors for the last year, and they keep telling me, well, we don't know what's wrong with you, but they can't fix the pain. And so I struggle. Sometimes it's depressing, and you just feel like you can't get out of bed. And I've had a couple of days where I just couldn't get out of bed. And but I have come a long way from where I was. We went to a conference here. It was actually the Crime Victims Coalition Award ceremony, and she was the speaker there. And I remember asking one of the girls, who's the speaker? And she told me, and I said, well, what's her background? What's her story? And she said that she was in a domestic abuse relationship, and I said, I need to go meet her. And my boss and I sat on the front row, and I just looked over and I saw this lady sitting there. And I said, are you Michelle? And she said, yes. And I said, I'm Kristen. I have a story to tell you. We need to talk. We have the same stories, with similar situations. And so from that day forward, she has been a godsend. And we talk a lot. We go to lunch, and we just have some really good conversations, and we heal together. She's just a great person.